NES games with horror influences. About as long as video games have been around, horror games have also been around. The earliest horror game I could find was 1972's Haunted House for the Magnavox Odyssey. Look at that, isn't that spooky? Anyway, I know there's probably some text-based adventure games that predated it, but as far as home consoles go, this is the earliest example I could dig up. Horror is one of those things that people just love, and always have. Feeling scared is one of the best ways for you to feel alive and appreciate life. It's also a lot of fun, and it really fuels the imagination. I like to picture cavemen sitting around a fire in Stone Age times, telling stories of monsters and giant creatures that they're hunting, just to scare the cave balls out of each other. Personally, some of my favorite memories of being a kid are staying up late and watching the classic horror movies on TV, or catching Joe Bob Briggs on Monster Vision, or Elvira wherever she happens to pop up, so to speak. Anyway, luckily there's a lot of crossover between my two favorite things, horror movies and video games. I kind of feel like the NES is often overlooked in the horror genre, since many of the games that define the current state of horror gaming came out on the Super Nintendo and the PS1. So I wanted to take a quick look at some of the games that I either found outright scary when I was young, or just had a really cool horror atmosphere. Chiller. Evidently this was an arcade game that you played with one of those arcade light guns, and it got an unlicensed port to the NES. This isn't a game I played when I was younger, and I've never seen a copy of it or even knew it existed until I came across it randomly while watching videos about horror games on YouTube. This game is essentially just 4 different levels that keep looping over and over, arcade style. That is, until you either die or just get tired of the game and shut it off. When I first played this game, I just assumed I was a Ghostbuster or some type of demon hunter, shooting ghosts and zombies coming from the grave and what have you. Even though shooting this nun was a little strange in the first level. And the baby carriage. Who shoots a baby carriage? In level 2, it's a hallway and it's mostly full of ghosts and stuff that you can shoot, so nothing too strange there either. But level 3 and 4 tell a different story. These levels are torture chambers, and you spend your time in them torturing people and blowing their skin off and their various body parts. You're clearly the bad guy here. Look, you can even shoot these things and make the rack stretch people out or make the torture mechanisms work in various ways. Honestly, it makes you feel kind of guilty for shooting these poor tortured people, but you kind of have to advance the game, so might as well, I guess. Anyway, the graphics aren't great, but they do a good job of creating a spooky atmosphere. The first level in particular with this graveyard has kind of a Halloweenish vibe that I really dig. And the second one just looks like a haunted hallway in a mansion or something. You don't have a limit on ammo in this game, and honestly the first time playing I kind of had a tough time, but then I found a trick. Play with a controller and just hold down the button. At that point you can just sweep your cursor around the screen and clear everything with little effort. Whatever your cursor touches gets shot. From that point on the game becomes pretty easy just to blow through all the different levels. Anyway, I don't know if I would call this a good game by any means, but it's dark and atmospheric and probably has more gore and torture than any other game I can think of on the NES. Sweet Home. This game is fantastic. This is one I didn't hear about until I was an adult either. But to be fair, this game wasn't released in the US originally, but it was translated later. I love all the work the retro gaming community puts into projects like this. Without them, we may not be able to enjoy classics like this one here. Anyway, this game kind of works as a proto version of Resident Evil. Does this door opening scene look familiar to anybody? Sweet Home is a survival horror and RPG kind of hybrid. You roam around and do battle RPG style like Dragon Quest. But you have a limited inventory, and items and tools are needed to progress, just like in a survival horror game. The graphics are great and the music is fantastic, and they really ramp up the spook factor in the atmosphere. If you haven't played this one, I would absolutely suggest that you do. But I will suggest using a guide or a walkthrough if you get stuck, because there are some things about this game that aren't very obvious on your first playthrough. Uninvited. This game is part of a trilogy of games that were ported over from the Mac. Shadowgate, Deja Vu, and this one, Uninvited. Unofficially known as the Mac Venture Trilogy. At least that's what I like to call them. It's a point-and-click adventure-style game that pits you in a haunted mansion in search of your sister. This game gets right to it too. There's not much story or exposition. You just start the game in this car and bam, you gotta get out before it blows up. And if you take too long, it'll call you lazy and it will blow up. This game is the perfect example of how a game doesn't need jump scares or audio stings to be horror. This one is all about atmosphere. The storytelling here takes the same approach as the Souls games, where you get a little bit to go on, but beyond that your environment and items and conversations with people fill in the rest of the narrative, instead of the game flat out telling you what's happening. I love this approach because it causes you to think about the story and make your own associations with the things around you. It causes you to become more immersed in the world that you've been thrown into. There's all sorts of ghosts and monsters all over the mansion and you have to figure out how to get around. And there's this thing, whatever this thing is. Anyway, the graphics in this game consist mostly of still images. Things spring to life when you cause something to happen in the game though. There's a few animations here and there during those times. The pixel art is still pretty good for the most part, and sometimes it can be downright creepy, especially considering they only take up a portion of the screen. I could never figure out why this sky here is just one solid shade of gray. Wouldn't there be clouds or something up there? I don't understand why they made this decision. Anyway, in this game there's a lot of trial and error. This game is known for all the hilarious and macabre ways you can kill yourself. Sometimes it's fun dying in this game, more fun than succeeding actually, because of the descriptions of your death. Sometimes they can get pretty graphic. The music in this game is good, and it does a good job at perpetuating the creepy gothic type atmosphere. I suggest a playthrough with this one just to experience the ambience and the atmospheric haunted mansion. Though I think using a guide, if you get stuck, is wise. Otherwise, you'll be stuck just trying to use every item you have in your inventory on everything you see. And that could take a while since there are so many objects in this game that you can loot that do absolutely nothing for you. Anyway, this is one of my favorites on the Nintendo along with the other Mac Venture games. I suggest to give it a shot, it's great. Maniac Mansion. There isn't much about this game that hasn't already been said, so instead, I'll just share my experience with the game. I love Maniac Mansion. There's a lot of throwbacks to a lot of horror tropes here, and while I'd say the game is more sci-fi comedy than horror really, there are some genuine moments that remind me a lot of the classic horror movies. The main villain, Dr. Fred, is an obvious throwback to classic mad scientists like Dr. Frankenstein. There's a comet here that takes over people's minds, and there's these tentacle creatures. I'm not sure if they are aliens or they just kind of live in the house, but they're there nonetheless. There's this evil nurse here who likes making inappropriate innuendos, and a mummy that lives in a bathtub. Evidently, there's someone in the mansion that likes watching TV and an Iron Maiden too for some reason. Maniac Mansion is pretty much pants on head crazy, but in the best way possible. The graphics are great and all the music is great, and everyone in the mansion kind of lives their own life and moves around in real time. It gives the mansion its own personality and it kind of becomes its own character. There are several ways to beat this game, and if I remember right, there is no way to permanently destroy a save file. By that I mean soft lock yourself or flub yourself in a way that you can't win. That is, unless you get all of your teenagers killed, which you can do, but that takes a lot of effort. So I say, try playing through this one without a guide or anything and just experiment and see what you can find on your own. It's a lot of fun. I know there's some that I've completely overlooked and should be added to the list, but this is already kind of a longish script, and I didn't want it to become much longer, so I'll probably do more in the future. Maybe I could even turn this into a series where I just talk about horror games on different platforms. I guess we'll see. I'll definitely be covering classics like Castlevania and Frankenstein and the slasher games and all that, so be on the lookout for that too. Either way, as always, thanks for stopping by.